All right, today we are looking at is Jesus God? This is probably one of the most important parts of what Christianity is about, and it's one that people struggle with. And I've even heard of people that had conversations with people and said, I don't know if Jesus is really God. I think it's really open to interpretation, and people have a lot of different views about it. So we'll just start with the place that Jesus claimed to be God, okay? In John, Jesus says this, he's having an issue with the Pharisees, a debate with them. He says, I and the Father are one. He said, me and God, we're the same. And just in case there's any hint of anything, the Jews picked up stones to stone him, to kill him, because blasphemy. Because you, a mere man, are claiming to be God. So not only did Jesus say it, but his enemies are like, yeah, you're claiming to be God. So the claim is out there. So what did Jesus do with it? It's important today. People will say that they don't think that Jesus was God or that he claimed to be that. But when you read through the Gospels and the rest of the New Testament, you can see it pretty obvious that he did claim that, and he did prove it. Paul wrote in Colossians. So Paul, the apostle, Jesus lived, he picked his 12 apostles, he died, he rose again, he went to heaven. Afterwards, Saul was persecuting the Christians, putting them in jail, not only in his town, but he would go to other places to persecute them. And that's where he was heading to Damascus. Jesus appears to him and says, yeah, here's who I am. And then it looks like Saul continues to meet with Jesus later, one-on-one. And so here's what Paul writes. He changes his name to Paul and says, Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created, things in heaven, on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things were created by him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So there's a lot of stuff right there. First of all, he's the image of the invisible God. The word we get there, the word is icon in the original Greek. I remember when I was a youth pastor, I was kind of going over this passage with my teens, and this one kid goes, oh, icon, oh, that's like the thing on your computer. And I'm like, it sure is. And I'd never made that connection, and it just kind of came out. And I'm like, but I've remembered it since then. So, out of the mouths of youths, right? He's the icon, he's the representation of God on the earth. And not only for him by all things were created, no, he is the creative agent in the creation of the world. How did God create everything? He spoke, right? And God said, let there be light. And God said, on and on and on. Jesus is called the Word, right? He's the creative part, the creative agent of the universe. And then the last thing, he's before all things. So before all of creation, he existed. And in him, all things hold together. And so I don't remember all the science stuff from this, but there's all the force that keeps the universe spinning, right? You got to keep the whole thing going. And that's a part of Jesus' role, is not only did he speak it into existence, but he sustains it. He keeps it going. I mean, if you ever watch jugglers and they're throwing, 5 or 6 or 7 balls constantly going, if you can imagine keeping all the atoms of the universe going at the same time, making sure that we don't spin out of control, that probably takes a little bit of power. I can barely handle work, home, other church life, let alone all of the universe. Jesus fulfilled prophecies. Is Jesus really God? So Jesus said he was. Other people said he was. How did he go about proving this? Well, number one, he fulfilled prophecies. Jesus was saying to them, this is what I told you while I was still with you. Everything must be fulfilled that was written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms. So that sums up the whole Old Testament. The Jewish people called their Bible, they kind of had it broken up into sections, and they just called Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms. That just kind of denotes the entire Old Testament. Jesus is saying, hey, all those prophecies that you heard about me, I had to fulfill those. And the first coming, there are 109 prophecies about Jesus' first coming in the Old Testament. But there's 224 about his second coming.
Is that the resurrection is the second coming?
No, his resurrection is when he comes back at the end of the world.
Oh, okay. Not when, after the 3 days, not that part?
Right,
Okay.
right. First coming was just when he came, showed up on the earth, rose from the dead. Second coming is when the end of time is,
Okay, gotcha.
when Jesus returns, and we get to go to be with him for eternity. So, as much as there is about the first coming, and I think we've talked in here a lot about the prophecies. The most famous one is, and I've heard you guys say it, but I'll just repeat it real quick. If Jesus fulfilled 8 prophecies, just 8, the chances of him fulfilling those ones that he couldn't do ahead of time if he wasn't God. You know, you don't get to choose where you're born. You don't get to choose that someone betrays you for a certain amount of money. You know, that just happens outside of your control. If Jesus fulfilled 8 of the prophecies out of the 109, it's like if you took the state of Texas and filled it 2 feet deep with silver dollars, mixed them all up, and you just picked one silver dollar, put your mark on it, threw it in the middle of Texas, stirred it all up, had someone parachute in there, blindfolded, and pick the silver dollar. And the chances of that happening are Jesus fulfilling 8 of the 109 prophecies. So it's just stupid. It's just astronomical. It's just not going to happen unless you're God. You know, that's the thing is when you're God, you're outside of time. You see the whole thing at the same time. You know what's going to happen. And you put that in the mouths of the prophets. And they say, hey, here's what's going to happen. Sure enough, tens, hundreds, thousands of years later, Jesus fulfills those prophecies. There's plenty of stuff online if you want to check out. I got some good books. Josh McDowell has some good books about prophecies. Jesus performed miracles. Jesus performed miracles. When you look at his ministry, there's plenty of healings where people were brought to him. There's plenty of times where just crowds of people came to him and Jesus performed miracles, healings, the feeding of the 5,000, where they just take just one kid's sack lunch and able to feed 5,000 men plus women and children and have leftovers. So as you read through the Bible, as you read through the Gospels especially, you see all these things that Jesus did that he couldn't do unless he was God. And probably one really cool one, Jesus puts his Jesus and his disciples are in a boat going across the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus is like, he's had a long day, so he sits up in the front and takes a nap. This huge storm comes up and just tossing the boat, and he's tired, so he's sleeping. And the disciples, they're trying to keep from having the boat capsize, and it's looking out of control. And finally, the disciples wake him and say, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Jesus gets up, looks around and goes, "Quiet, be still." And just goes completely calm. And the disciples are like, huh. He says to them, why are you afraid? Don't you have any faith? Don't you know who I am yet? Don't you understand the power that I have? And they were terrified and asked each other, who is this guy? Right? Even the winds and the waves obey him? Now, if you can imagine in Phoenix, the closest thing we have to a storm is the windstorms in the spring, the haboobs.
Right.
It's such a thing. I grew up in western Kansas. We called it like springtime, okay? That's all haboobs were for us. Every day in the spring, it's just windy because the wind comes down off the mountains in Colorado, and it's just every day is windy. But if you can imagine here in Phoenix, and one of the haboobs comes in, and someone just says, hey, you know what? I've got stuff going on in my house. We'll just stop. And the whole thing just stops. You've got to have kind of special power to make that happen. That just doesn't happen automatically unless you've got the power to make it happen, unless you're God and you're in control of all those things.
You think he went back to sleep after that?
Well, it's a hard day's work, right? I think, why wouldn't he go back to sleep? I would.
Yeah.
Jesus taught with authority. When Jesus finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching because he taught as one who had authority and not as the teachers of the law. The teachers of the law, they were very well versed in the Bible. They would have at least the first 5 books of the Bible memorized. The Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. At least that would be memorized. And so if you're teaching, you know your stuff. And just to be a teacher, you had to have had a lot of training in that. But when Jesus taught, there's a whole other level there. And the people are like, wow, there's something different about this guy. Probably because if they're quoting stuff from the Old Testament, where did that stuff from the Old Testament come from? Jesus. Jesus is the Word. And so when you see a lot of the Old Testament prophets, it says, and the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah. The word of the Lord came to Isaiah. I believe that was Jesus showing up to those people. Now, was it in physical form where you had a conversation with them? Or was he just talking in their head as they're going? Don't know. It just says the word of the Lord came. But Jesus was there directing people to write down the words in the Bible. So they're just quoting him. So why wouldn't he know his stuff?
Would the teachers of law remove Jesus from the equation? Would they teach in the same manner? I imagine like a crowd of people, they're teaching the Old Testament, and then Jesus comes in, say, to a city where he hasn't been before, and they just think he's a shepherd, right, or something, and he teaches the law probably better than than these scholars or.
Yeah, that's what was going on.
Okay.
Right. And he was a rabbi, he was a teacher, but there's just a difference between, and I use the illustration, there's a difference between an owner and an employee.
Right.
When you're an employee at work, when you clock out, dude, you're gone. You don't think about work, right? When you're the owner of the company, it sticks with you all the time. It consumes you, and you don't help but not thinking about it, and that's the mentality is. Jesus was the owner, He wrote all this stuff in the beginning, and there's just a different level of authority there. Jesus lived a sinless life. In Hebrews, it talks about Jesus. Therefore, since we have such a great high priest who has gone through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. We do not have a high priest who is able to sympathize with our weaknesses. We have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet was without sin. And so Jesus, when he came in the flesh, he had the same temptations that we do. He's tempted in the same ways that we are. The difference is he didn't give in to any of those. So if we're looking at our lives and if we're honest about how we live our life, there's a lot of things that we're tempted to do wrong in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year. There's a lot of things out there. And we give in. We keep giving in. And when we see God's law and what he tells us to do, And the way we live our life, it doesn't always match up perfectly. And Jesus is the only one that's ever done that. And when even his enemies came and accused him of things, he's like, okay, which of God's commands did I break? Which one are you stoning me for? And his enemies, the people who hated him and wanted him dead, couldn't come up with a single thing that he had done that was wrong. Other than, he said, I claim to be God. Which, if he's not God, he should be stoned for. Absolutely. That's blasphemy, and the punishment for that was death. But if he is God, and that's just the part that people couldn't wrap their mind around, because how often does God show up in the flesh, right?
I have a quick question on that, on the claim to be God portion. The prophecies, were written about Jesus, God coming down in the flesh. So in Jesus' life, was he the first person to claim himself as God? Because I feel like it was others that claimed him as God before he even claimed himself as God.
Right. Yeah, there were plenty of people around the time of Jesus and before who claimed to be the Messiah, the Savior who came to save the world, to save the Jewish people. A lot of times those Messiahs were trying to kick out the Romans. Okay. So there's a lot of that with those going on. Yes, there's a lot of false claims to that. And that's where Jesus proves it by the things that he did and the things he said. Oh, and then there's that one, right? Save the best to last. Regarding his, Paul's writing this to the Romans, regarding his son, who is, as to his human nature, was a descendant of David, and who the Spirit of holiness was declared with power to be the Son of God by his resurrection from the dead. People just don't rise from the dead on their own power. Jesus proved he has the power over death. It's pretty cool if you ever go to Israel. There's a couple places, but there's a place that could be the tomb. I'm not going to say 100% for sure that it was, but it fits a lot of the descriptions of where the tomb was. And just to walk in there and go, wow, this could be. In my years as a pastor, I did a lot of funerals. And, you go to the gravesite and, they bury them. Been to a lot of cemeteries. Never seen someone pop up after the funeral. Didn't see him again. Jesus is the only one. And he proved that he had the power over death because he appeared not only to his friends and followers, but to 500 people at one time. People may trip out on something and have a delusion, and you may have a hallucination of something. 500 people don't have the same hallucination. And so Jesus appeared to people over a period of 40 days and was able to eat with them and was able to touch them and those type of things to prove he wasn't just a ghost, he was a physical person in the flesh. And that's what our whole, that's what Christianity is all about, is we follow a guy who was sinless, was the perfect sacrifice for us, and proved it through other things, but ultimately through the resurrection of the dead. There you go.